Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the March PHJV Policy Committee webinar. This month, Suzanne, I hope I get this right, Marechal, will be speaking to us about prioritizing hydrologically significant natural areas within the Bow River watershed. Whenever you're ready, Suzanne.
That's great. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ian and Hugh, for organizing this webinar, and thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in. Today, I'll be presenting a work that was done in the Bow River watershed. It was a project that identified and high-grade hydrologically significant natural areas. It was a collaborative initiative that was started by land trusts who recognized, particularly after the Alberta floods, that there was a need to look at potential conservation projects from an expanded perspective, a perspective that includes building watershed resilience. So to walk you through how this project was built, I'd like to start by reviewing a little bit of the project background, going over some of the key objectives of the group, looking briefly at how the project was built, and then focusing in on the map projects that were created and how they might be used for conservation and land use planning. And then I'd like to wrap up the presentation by having a next steps discussion. So the project is a result of an amalgamation of two different projects. Justin Thompson of the Southern Alberta Land Trust was working on a project, a hydrologically significant areas project in the Oldman watershed. And as part of a SAIT capstone project, I was working with the Nature Conservancy of Canada on a project in the Bow. So in an effort to build consistency across watershed boundaries, a core group from the Bow decided to adopt the methodology that was used and the technical expertise gained in the Old Man project to work together to create similar maps in the Bow River watershed. So for this project, the core group was Western Skyland Trust, Southern Alberta Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the Bow River Basin Council, and then we had input from Tara Simmerich, from the Alberta NAWAP Partnership, SAIT, and the City of Calgary. We were fortunate to receive most of our funding from Alberta NAWAP and the Land Stewardship Centre. So key to the group's objectives were to prioritize natural assets that support healthy hydrologic function if they're left underdeveloped. So natural assets, natural infrastructure is an underutilized option when it comes to building watershed resilience. And for us, watershed resilience is any features on the landscape that help mitigate floods and droughts and enhance water quality. It's also found that I read recently in a report written by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, there's lots of case studies out there too that prove that natural infrastructure and natural assets offer proven cost benefits. As well, other project objectives was to provide assessment tools that could be used to help make decisions around conservation and land use planning. And finally, we wanted to support partnerships where conservation values overlap. And that was the foundation of building this group. But it also will be valuable down the road when municipalities such as the City of Calgary start to invest in source water stewardship. So to support healthy hydrologic function and to build resilient watersheds, landscapes are crucial. So in this project, we prioritized landscapes that are a water source. They provide water for rivers and lakes. We prioritize landscapes that have the capacity to absorb and store excess water, or excess water in the form of precipitation, slowing overland flow and releasing water over longer periods. And we also prioritized landscapes with the ability to reduce erosion and filter sediments and contaminants. So to represent these important hydrologic functions, we started the process by collecting data and building 6 landscape layers, which were used as the foundation for our maps. So on the left, you can see the 6 landscape layers that we built: precipitation, proximity to water, soil infiltration, land cover, slope, and surficial geology. And on the right, we've listed the natural asset functions that are beneficial, and these are mainly based around regulating water quality and water quantity. Next, we looked at all those records in those landscape layers that we built, and we scored and classified them. Scores range between 1 to 4, with 4 representing the best outcome for hydrologic health. And all these scores and classifications were decided based on input from technical papers and peers. So in the next few slides, I'm not going to spend a lot of time just looking at the details of this. I'm going to move through the layers in the maps to look at the distributions and talk a little bit more about the scoring. So in the first slide, we're looking at mean annual precipitation. The areas that are scored the highest are those that provide the most water, the highest levels of precipitation, and those are in dark blue. You can see them mostly on the west side of the map. And precipitation classifications were delineated by overlaying the mean annual precipitation results onto natural subregions and aligning the boundary lines. For areas proximal to water, these consist of riparian and flood hazard areas. They also consist of streams, rivers, and canals buffered by 250 meters, and wetlands and lakes buffered by 50 meters. And these areas are represented in light blue, and they are given the highest score in our model. We chose to use those larger buffers as buffer efficiency can vary widely in differing landscapes. Next, we used groundwater vulnerability data to represent soil infiltration. Areas with very high vulnerability index, or there's areas that have permeable and coarse surface material. So these areas were given the highest score because they have the highest soil infiltration, and they're represented in dark blue. For the land cover, natural land cover, forests, shrubland, and grasslands, which is mapped in green, was given the highest score of 4. Cropland was given a lower score of 2, and any developed areas or exposed areas was given the lowest score. For the slope, we chose to give areas with steeper slopes from 16 to 30% the highest score. Areas with extremely high scores or extremely high slope gradients were given the lowest score because these areas are considered undevelopable, and they weren't an interest to us in the area of conservation. So when we did look at scoring the slope gradients, we took into consideration the influence of undeveloped flat areas, maximizing infiltration and slowing overland flow, but we also took into consideration the impact that undeveloped steeper slopes have on minimizing runoff and erosion. So for scoring purposes, it was generally felt that the effects of increased runoff and erosion were more damaging to water quality and natural habitats than increased overland flow, so we did give steeper slopes a little higher score. Rationalization for the slope classifications were based on work done by Nassif and Wilson on the influence of slope on infiltration and runoff. And finally, we looked at surficial geology, areas with very high surficial erosion potential. Those are areas in red, was given the highest score. These are the areas that, if developed, would increase the amount of sedimentation into the watershed. And the criterion ranking for soil erosion potential was taken from the BC Ministry of Forests Terrain Stability Guide. So after we assigned scores to our layers, we then applied some weights to each of our layers, and this weighting was determined during a workshop that was done in the Old Man Watershed, and really had a lot of input from the technical experts in the room. The weighting was based both on hydrologic function and data quality. And so once we had applied the weights to the scores, then we overlaid all the layers and multiplied the weighted scores together to give us a final score. And you can see in the table there on the left-hand side the weighting we gave to each of our layers. Proximity to water received a little higher weighting, and surficial geology received a lower rating, probably more due to the data quality than anything else. So by mapping and classifying the final scores, we were able to prioritize our hydrologically significant areas in the bow. If you look at this map, the darker areas in reds and in orange, dark orange, are those with the higher scores. And these ones are the areas that these areas are more suitable for conservation based on their hydrologic function. So using these prioritizations that we created, we also created tools to help facilitate land use decisions and conservation around conservation and land use. A map book was generated to allow a zoomed-in look at the watershed subbasins, as well as KMZ files were produced so that the hydrologically significant areas could be viewed in Google Earth. So here we have a look at the Northwest watershed overview in the map book. And the map book is an interactive PDF. And so what you can do is you can go to these overview pages, click on a subbasin name, and it'll bring you into a zoomed view of the subbasin. I'm not going to give a demo. These are just screenshots. So I'm going to say we've clicked on the Big Hill Creek sub-watershed. This will automatically bring you to a page where you have a close-up of the hydrologically significant areas in that subbasin. And included with these prioritizations, there's also the townships, there's the parks, and there's native First Nation lands, as well as grazing leases. So that's the map book. We also created KMZ files that I'd like to demonstrate now as potential tools for land planning and conservation. Again, I will not be giving a live demo in Google Earth. I'll just be providing some screenshots. KMZ files were created for each subbasin in the watershed. You can click on the KMZ file and they will automatically open up Google Earth and zoom into your data. And that's what you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. That's the result of just clicking on the Big Hill Creek subbasin. You can see that Cochrane is in the lower left on this map, so that gives you a point of reference. So the beauty of using these KMZ files is that you can really zoom into your area of interest. And once you zoom into your area of interest, you can click the map on and off to get a really good view of the terrain underneath, which is what I've done on the right side of the screen. You can also click on an area in the map to view the hydrologic scores. You can see that on the right image, or on the left image. And this can provide some insight into why one area might be scored higher than another. With these KMZ files, you can also add layers. On the right-hand side of the slide, we have added currently conserved areas in purple. And by doing this, we bring focus not only to the areas that are hydrologically significant, but also to regions that can build conservation continuity. The idea of using these KMZ files may be foreign to you, but they can easily be created from any spatial layers that you have. As well, I'm starting to notice more and more that in open source data portals, they are now producing KMZ files as well. So in this slide, I'd like to show again how additional layers can be used to maybe highlight an area of interest for an organization or a landowner. In this slide here, I have added sort of from a conservation perspective, targeted conservation lands. I've kept also the currently conserved areas, and by doing that, you can start refining your focus and really looking at areas that might jump out as areas that you would like to conserve. From a landowner perspective, you might use these maps to help further inform your management and development decisions. You may help you decide where you want to graze or cultivate. From a stewardship perspective, the maps may help in best management practices. It may help you decide where you want to fence or areas you might want to restore to build continuity. And from a municipal or provincial perspective, you can use these maps to help make decisions with land use planning. It may have crossed your mind that the areas that we have high-graded as hydrologically significant match riparian areas, and in fact they do. And to bring home this point, I wanted in this image to show you where the streams and rivers are, and so I've added streams and rivers buffered by 100 meters, and those are in light blue. So you can see those trend quite well with the areas that we have prioritized. But in addition to those very important areas, there are many examples where slopes and upland areas are identified as hydrologically significant as well. In this map, there are 3 areas that are away from the waterway and the traditional buffers that may also be relevant for conservation, and I've outlined those areas in red. Prioritizing hydrologically significant areas across jurisdictions allows us to work collaboratively and think regionally using a more consistent platform. In this slide, we have isolated a subset of the Bow River Basin that only includes watersheds that feed into the city of Calgary. Municipalities can start to view land planning from a source water protection perspective. And we can further zero in on potential conservation areas by eliminating protected areas, crown land, and First Nation land in order to focus on private land. And I've done that in this slide. You can see that the areas that are in the orange are just your private land areas. And if the goal is to invest in source water protection, then we could also add areas that have low agricultural value and thus lower land value to further narrow our search. So to start kind of wrapping up this presentation, I thought I would just summarize what is unique to this initiative. So this project focuses on watershed resilience. We haven't added anything else but areas that are would be hydrologically significant areas. But with that, there's an option to supplement the maps by adding what might be considered value-added layers by an organization. So I put some ideas down there, and we've gone over some examples in the previous slides. As well, unique to this objective this initiative was to develop slides at a higher develop maps at a higher resolution. So we have maps that give detail below a sub-quarter section level. And also our maps span across watersheds and jurisdictions. So as in next steps, we are just putting the final touches to the map products, which when they are completed will be available on websites. We're looking at hosting these products for download on websites like the Bow River Basin Council website or the Old Man Watershed Council website. And to just kind of make one final statement, we really hope that what we've provided can be used as a first assessment tool that will provide opportunities to work collaboratively on conservation investments. So that sort of summarizes what we've done. I hope that gives you an idea of the work that we've done and the tools that we have created. Thank you very much for your time. Be happy to answer any questions now if you have any.
Any questions you have, please type them in into the chat box. Thank you. One question is, how easy will this information be to update in the future?
That is a very, very good question. I have built the model. It is scripted, so we can run through the script, adding new data, so it can be updated as new data presents itself. It would take a little bit of work, but it's absolutely doable.
To answer your question as to whether the presentation will be available after the webinar, yes, it will be. They're all placed on the PHJV webinar YouTube channel.
Thank you for all the comments coming in.
Yes, this should be up on the YouTube channel hopefully by the end of today.
Ian, do you send out a link, or is that just something that's on your website?
The PHDV webinar YouTube channel is fairly easy to find in YouTube, but I can have Hugh send out a link.
Okay.
Can you go into more detail about the assignment of weights to the layers?
I can. I do have a slide here. Let me just see if I can get to the slide. Okay, this is a slide that kind of gives you a bit of detail about how we decided to weight each of the layers. We looked at both the hydrologic function and how many functions each layer would be adding, and those we rated from 1 to 5. We also looked at the spatial quality, and we rated that from 1 to 3. And from those two scores, we we calculated a relative weight, and then worked it out from there. It was a lot of this work was done by Associated Engineering, who were the people that worked, who were the group that worked on the Old Man Watershed methodology. So I hope that gives you like a rough, I could give you a more detailed information if you want to go into it, but this kind of gives you a bit of an overview of how we split, how we weighted all the layers based on the two different factors.
Okay, thanks for the great presentation. Does the approach enable you to identify the individual top priority areas within the highest rated general area? Can it, and then the second part of the question is, can it tell you where conservation efforts should be targeted first and at a finer scale?
I would say that I'm trying to think of how to answer this. Can you tell where conservation efforts should be targeted at a finer scale? The ratings are pretty, like if you look at once you have a chance to look at the prioritization maps, you can zoom in quite a ways and get a lot of detail as to which areas are prioritized. And I think beyond that, adding other layers that you deem important in your planning or in your conservation would be useful in helping you to further define or further refine areas that you might want to prioritize. I hope that answers your question. Excellent. Thanks, David.
On private lands, opportunity comes into play once you have identified generally important areas. Okay, that must be a comment from Mike.
Okay.
Thank you for posting the link, Paul. We'll also send out the link later today. All right. It doesn't appear that anybody else has any more questions. So thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. And thank you, Suzanne. This was an excellent presentation today. And we'll be, we'll be having another, we look forward to seeing you all again in April for our next webinar. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.